Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sinha from BBA AQ Batch 2. I am here to speak about the topic of communication. Meaning of communication. Communication is an English word. It is developed from a Latin word communis. Communis means to share. Therefore, it can be said that communication is that process in which people try to exchange views to each other. General awareness. Communication is the process of transferring or sharing of information between two or more people. Definitions of communication. Liggins define communication. Communication is that process in which two or more person mutually exchange ideas, facts, feelings, etc. In such a way that everyone understands it. Sender and receiver coordinate by means of message. According to Liggins and Weger, communication is that process which changes the ideas, opinions, and attitudes of people by using information, instructions, and decisions under the social system. According to Edgar Dale, communication is the sharing of ideas and feelings in the mood of mutuality. According to John Adair, communication is essentially the ability of one person to make contact with another, and make himself and herself understand. According to Lewis Allen, communication is a bridge of meaning. It involves a systematic and continuous process of telling, listening, and understanding. Process of communication. As communication occurs, senders and receiver interact by encoding, sending, and decoding message. Encoding means putting the message into words, reads, or looks in order to decode or interpret the message. There are 7 major elements of communication process. First one is sender. Communication begins with sender. Sender conceives his ideas based on the accumulated attitudes, experience, and skills. Second one is encoding. The sender begins with the encoding process wherein he uses certain words or non-verbal methods such as symbols, signs, body gestures, etc. to translate the information into a message. The sender's knowledge, skill, perception, background, completeness, etc. Has a great impact on the success of the message. Third one is message. Once the encoding is finished, the sender gets the message he intends to convey. The message can be written, oral, symbolic, or non-verbal, such as body gesture, silence, sound, etc., or any other signal that triggers the response of the receiver. Next one is communication channel. The sender chooses the medium through which the sender wants to convey his message to the recipient. It must be selected carefully in order to make the message effective and correctly interpreted by the recipient. The choice of the medium depends on the interpersonal relationship between the sender and the receiver, and also on the urgency of the message being sent. Oral, virtual, written, sounds, gestures, etc. are some of the commonly used mediums. Next one is receiver. The receiver is the person for whom the message is intended or targeted. She tries to comprehend it in the best possible manner, such that the communication objective is attained. The degree to which the receiver decodes the message depends on his knowledge of the subject matter, experience, trust, and relationship with the sender. Next one is decoding. Here, the receiver interprets the sender message and tries to understand it in the best possible manner. An effective communication occurs only if the receiver understands the message in exactly the same way as it was intended by the sender. Next one is feedback. It is the final step of the process that ensures the receiver has received the message and interpreted it correctly as it was intended by the sender. It increases the effectiveness of the communication as it permits the data to know as it permits the sender to know the efficiency of his message. Next one is types of communication. There are 4 types of communication. First one is verbal. It is a method that uses speech in the form of speaking to convey a message or information. It is the most popular and effective mode of communication, usually practiced during video conference, phone calls, presentations, one-on-one conversations, and meetings. It supports both non-verbal and written communication. Second one is non-verbal. It is basically a practice of gestures, facial expressions, and body language to send information. It can be implemented intentionally and unintentionally when communicating For instance, a person can smile unintentionally when they hear an interesting piece of information or a piece of idea. Next one is written. It is all about typing, printing symbols, numbers, letters, and writing to send a piece of information. Sometimes used to record information for evidence of reference purpose. In general, the written style of communication is used in books, blogs, pamphlets, memos, and letters to share and spread information. In the workplace, email is a common example. Next one is visual. It uses arts, photographs, sketches, graphs, charts, and drawing to pass on information. It is used especially during presentation to present a visual effect and support written or verbal communication. Next one is barrier to communication. First barrier is linguistic barrier. It is one of the main barriers that limit effective communication. Language is most commonly employed tool of communication. Sometimes even a thick dialect may render the communication ineffective. As per some estimates, the dialects of every two regions changes within a few kilometers. Even in the same workplace, different employees will have different linguistic skills. As a result, the communication channels that span would affect it. Second one is psychological barriers. There are various mental and psychological issues that may be barriers to effective communication. Some people have stage fear, speech disorder, phobia, depression, etc. All of these conditions are very difficult to manage sometimes and will most certainly limits the ease of communication. Next one is emotional barriers. The emotional IQ of a person determines the ease and comfort with which they can communicate. A person who is emotionally mature will be able to communicate effectively. A perfect mixture of emotions and facts is necessary for effective communication. Emotions like anger, frustration, humor can blur the decision-making capacities of a person and thus limit the effective communication. Second one is the next one is physical barriers. They are the most obvious barriers. They are the most obvious barriers to effective communication. These barriers are mostly easily removable in principle at ease. They include barriers like noise, closed doors, faulty equipment used for communication, etc. Sometimes in large organizations, the physical separation between various employees combined with faulty equipment may result in severe barriers. Next one is organizational barriers. As we saw, there are many methods of communication at an organizational level. Each of these methods has its own problems and constraints that may become barriers to effective communication. Most of these barriers arise because of misinformation, or lack of appropriate transparency available to the employees. Next one is attitude barriers. Attitudinal barrier, a perception that stops people from communicating well. Attitudinal barrier to communication may affect from poor management, personality conflicts, and battle to change or a lack of motivation. Active receivers of messages should challenge to overcome their attitudinal barrier to assist effective communication. Next one is perception barrier. Different people perceive the same things differently. This is a part which we must consider during the communication process. Knowledge of the communication levels of the audience is crucial to effective communication. All the messages or commune must be easy and clear. What is verbal communication? Verbal communication is a type of oral communication wherein the message is transmitted through the spoken words. Here the sender gives words to his feelings, thoughts, ideas, and opinions and express them in the form of speeches, discussions, presentations, and conversation. Effectiveness of the verbal communication depends on the tone of the speakers, clarity of speech, volume, body language, and the quality of words used in the conversation. In case of verbal communication, the feedback is immediate since there are a simultaneous transmission and receipt of the message by the sender and receiver respectively. The success of a verbal communication depends not only on the speaking ability of an individual but also on the listening skills. The verbal communication is applicable in both the formal and informal kind of situations. This type of communication is further classified into four types. Interpersonal.
All right, that's it. Thank you very much. That was good. Communication is a dynamic process of conveying information, ideas, feelings, or opinion between two or more persons, either verbally or non-verbally. Mostly using this medium, different scholars and authors have defined communication as a different terms. Here, according to Newman and Summer, communication is exchange of fact, ideas, emotion, or opinion by two or more persons. According to Leland Brown, communication is the transmission and interchange of fact, ideas, feelings, or course of action. According to Weber-Spremen, communication is the process of establishing information, thoughts between a sender and a receiver. According to Frank G. Muir, communication is the intercourse by words, letter, or message. According to Thew Heman, communication means the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. Now let's come to describe about what is communication. Communication is the art of sharing or transforming information between two or more individuals or a group of people. Technically, each communication process require a sender, a receiver, a message, and a medium. The transmission of a message often has emotion and cultural significance attached to it. Due to difference in perception and understanding, the receiver at the end of the communication chain may not interpret the message in same way as intended by the original sender. This is the reason why employees look for candidates with a good communication skills who can convey ideas and messages accurately and effectively. Now come to the different types of communication. The communication process is not only dependent on relaying of information, it also depends on the audience and the context. We can use four types of communication skill in our daily life. First is verbal communication, second is non-verbal communication, third is written communication, and fourth is visual communication. Now let's describe about the types of communication. Verbal communication. It is the most common type of communication. It involves the use of spoken words or sign language to share information. Verbal communication can either happen face to face or through other channels such as mobile, radio, video conferencing. Thus, if your job involves conducting business meetings, giving presentation, and makes phone sales, your employer would expect you to have good verbal communication skills. Now come to the non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication involves passive communication through the use of gesture, tones of voice, body language, hand movements, and facial expression to share your thoughts and feelings. We can even communicate non-verbally by the way of our dress. Non-verbal communication often supports or adds to verbal communication. For example, the tone of our voice and our posture can reveal our mood or motion of those around us. Now come to the written communication. It includes communicating through writing, typing, and printing. It is done through channels such as letter, text message, email, social media, and books. Business may prefer written communication because it has fewer chances of distorting. For example, communicating a business plan is writing ensure that everyone get the same message and can refer to it anytime in the future. Now come to visual communication. Visual communication uses graphs, charts, photographs, maps, and logo to share information. It is mostly used in combination with verb or written communication in order to simplify the information. For example, using slides and flowcharts during a presentation makes it easier for the audience to grasp complex data. What is the difference between verbal and non-verbal communication? The communication in which the sender uses words to transmit the message and to the receiver known as verbal communication. But there are communication that taken place between the sender and the receiver with the use of sign is known as non-verbal communication. There are two types of verbal communication, formal communication and informal communication. But there are 8 types of non-verbal communication. That is space, timing, physical characteristic, body movements, touch, language, artifactory, and environment. Time consuming. Verbal communication is no time consuming communication, but the non-verbal communication is time consuming. It takes more time to understand the information or message. Chances of transmission of wrong message. It's rarely happen in verbal communication, but in non-verbal communication, the chances of transmission of wrong message is not possible. Now come to advantages. In verbal communication, the message can be clearly understood and immediate feedback is possible. But non-verbal communication helpful understanding motions, status, lifestyle, and feeling of the sender. Now come to the presence. The presence in verbal communication is the message can be transmitted through letters, phones, calls, etc. So the personal presence of the parties doesn't make any changes. But the presence in non-verbal communication is the personal presence of both the parties to communicate is a must necessary. Now come to documentary evidence. The requirements of documentary evidence is yes in the case of written communication, but there are no requirement of documentary evidence in non-verbal communication. So the conclusion is verbal and non-verbal communication are not contradictory to each other, but they are complementary. As somebody has rightly, actions are louder than words. In short, both go side by side and helps us a human being to interact to respond to other human. Verbal communication is obviously an important part of our life as we use word to communicate but have overthought that small baby cannot use language or words to speak, but he choose sign to show his anger, happiness, and sorrow. Similarly, deaf and dumb persons also use sign language for communicating with other people. So this is the significance of non-verbal communication in many lives. What is the communication process? The communication process is the dynamic framework and describe how a message travels between a sender and a receiver. Using various communication channels, its goal is to ensure the receiver decodes the message correctly and can provide feedback with the ease and speed. This is especially important for larger organizations that need to notify people in different areas and time zones about an event, problem, or change. Examples are multinational company, MNC. Communication process needs good management to sustain them in the long run. Leaders in the workplace establish the style, tone, and function of communication. If you are in a position of authority, it is especially important that you model good communication to your employees. Now, key components of the communication process. Here are 7 essential key components. First is sender, the person who conceptualized the idea and want it to deliver to the recipient. Encoding, the way of information is described or translated into a message. Now come to message, the idea, fact, or opinion that the sender wants to communicate. Communication channel, the method of delivering the message. Now receiver, the target audience of the message. Next is decoding, the interpretation of the message. And last is feedback, the responses or action a receiver takes after decoding message. How does the communication process work? The communication process works through a series of 7 steps. Now come to this step by step. The sender develop an idea to be sent. Communication begins with an idea. For you to contract a clear and actionable message, you need to organize your thoughts to understand the purpose of your message. Answer these 3 essential questions. Who do you want your message to reach? And what information does the receiver need to know? Last is, what do you want the receiver to do with this information? Now come to the second point. The sender encodes the message. Once the sender develops an idea, they need to present the message in a coherent structure. Ask yourself the following questions to understand the receiver's communication style better. Is the receiver knowledge about the topic? Does the receiver prefer a general overview or detailed information? Do you need to provide any additional resources to aid their judgment? Now, can you think of any distractions such as preconceived ideas that could influence their interpretation of the message? Now come to the third point. The sender selects the channel of communication that will be used. Think about how you need to send your message. The communication channel you use should organize your information in a way that enhance your point. Consider the 4 main types of communication channel when making your decision. First is verbal, non-verbal, written, visual. Verbal, face-to-face, telephone, video conference, presentation, and visual media. Non-verbal, eye contact, facial expression, body language, and dress code. Written, emails, newsletter, press release, text, message, social media, etc. Now visual. Visual is graph, chart, and drawings. The message travels over the channel of communication. The sender should select an appropriate medium for message. This will depends on your relationship with the receiver, the purpose of your writing, and the urgency of the message. The receiver receives the message. Next, recipient receives the message. The receiver will process the message according to the communication channel. The sender used, for example, the sender could deliver the message by speaking to the receiver. Face to face, for more formal message, the sender may present the message during a board meeting instead. Now, come to the next point. The receiver decodes the message. The receiver then decodes the sender message. In this stage, the receiver processes the information and understands its context and analyzes its implications. This is one of the most crucial stage in the communication process of the receiver. Can successfully decode the message. This implies the effectiveness of the communication process. As a result, business can continue their operation with a little disruption. Now come to the next point. The receiver provides feedback. Feedback is very important step in the communication process. Ask yourself the following questions to analyze and improve your future communication. Have you arranged a process for collecting feedback? Have you given the receiver an opportunity to ask questions? Can you pick up a non-verbal use of understand how the message has been received? Could you have done anything differently to achieve a better result? Now come to the next point. What is the communication barriers? Communication barriers are something that...
All right. Okay. Barriers you can discuss later.